And where's recording? Let's see. Oh, all right. So it looks like we are live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Awakening Consciousness with Asher and Jesse. It's just me, no Jesse today, but I do have a special guest. His name is Rob Edward. He runs a podcast where he has a lot of great and interesting guests on it. I was a guest on there as well a few weeks back, and he also has a background in like theater and performing arts, and we're going to be talking about like the current events of what's going on. It seems like they're trying to pull another fast one with some stuff going on, and yeah, he's also, looking to branch out and sort of use his talents to create sort of like digital video sales funnels for people. So if anyone has a product or a service that they're looking to sell, get in touch with Rob, and he can help sort of put a story or a narrative behind your product or service. So highly encourage people to check that out. And so Rob, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate you coming on mine. So I was very just gracious for the opportunity to come on yours.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you. And so yeah, let's talk about what's going on in the world. I titled the episode today, "The World is a Stage," because it seems like we're living in a world of narratives, and it's like whichever narrative the powers that be can get you to believe, that's the direction that they head things towards. And so what are you seeing from your perspective, and where do you think this is heading?
Well, I actually had quite the revelation. I don't know if it was during our conversation or afterwards when I was just going over what we had talked about. And it finally kind of solidified in my mind the fact that people think that they think logically, and they think that, and there is a place for that. I do think it's very important to study things like the trivium and the quadrivium and actual sort of empirical evidence and all that kind of stuff. But I think more people think that they think that way than they actually do.
Mm-hmm.
But as humans, we're wired to think narratively and in terms emotionally. But people don't believe that they're under that influence. They think they're thinking logically.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, I think that when you question people and you shatter paradigms, you get that emotional reaction, because if they were thinking logically, you would just think that they would take the information, realize that theirs is, faulty or there's something wrong with it, and they would assimilate new information and then go forward. But that's obviously not what we see, right? And
Right.
I think that that's why the powers that be really they're very good at wrapping up these deceptions in media and stuff like that. And that's why I think it's so important what people like Owen Benjamin have done and continue to do, is show people the lie and show, and I think that people, when they put it in movies, you're not only shattering what they're doing is they're building a narrative, but they're attaching your emotions to it, and then a specific point in time that you would watch that movie. In terms of things like Disney, people can't wrap their head around Disney being, not what it seems to be, because when you start to question that and you shatter that, then you're also shattering those times when you all cuddle up under a blanket with your parents and all these things, or you snuck over to your friend's house and you watch this movie or something like that, right? That emotion that's within that, you're also taking that away from them. And I think that that's why it's so important to them to spin a narrative to it and then put some aspect of media and storytelling in that, and then do the whole Edward Bernays sort of, if you can, attach some sort of emotionality to it and package that in the lie as well. It's so much more powerful, because you're not only breaking their mind, you're breaking their emotions and that, I guess, narrative cognitive kind of correlation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I kind of call it like your sort of ego investment into a story, into a certain set of circumstances, or let's put air quotes around the facts that you're coming across. And if you if there is emotion, like you said, then it becomes, not only are you questioning the facts that they've been presented, but you're also questioning and saying that they are wrong, or they are bad or wrong, or something like that, for going against what they've tied their ego or emotion into. And so it becomes something that people fight to stick to, like people with this new scare that people are coming across. I bet you that already there's people lining up to take one of the injections that Biden bought with I think $119 million worth of monkeypox injections, and it's like, here we go again.
Yeah, and I don't know where we're. And well, that's why I think people like Kaufman and your dad and stuff like that, they're right in the terms of, we got to get this right now, or we're just going to do this over and over and over again. And it's, yeah, it really kind of blew my mind when I started to really understand that, because I gained a lot of understanding, I guess. I don't know if compassion is the right word, but for people who are still continuing to believe in this sort of thing, because you're asking them. I don't know if we said this on the show, that on my channel too, but you're effectively asking people, you're throwing a 300-pound weight on a bench press and then being like, you have to contend with this right now.
Yeah.
And they're like, I haven't lifted weights. I haven't used my brain in years, and I don't want to do that. And I can't, like, I actually physically can't, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I remember, trying to wake people up, and, there would be some sort of event or something like this. And it's like, let's take the Federal Reserve or something like that. For someone who's never been exposed to that type of information, the amount of context and backstory that you have to tell and articulate is just so much that you can't even people's attention spans aren't even that long to just be able to listen to the backstory of the information that you'll need to say, oh, well, the Federal Reserve is, lowering interest rates, so it's creating more debt, and it's gonna, and this is gonna, it's not gonna be a good thing because the rich people have access to the debt first, and then by the time it trickles down to the poor people, by then all the prices of goods and services have increased. So it's actually bad that they're doing this because, it impacts the people on the lower rungs of the economic ladder last. They have access to capital last. And so they're just hit with the higher prices. They don't have access to more money like the rich people. And so it's like, to say that, there's a whole 100-year plus of backstory that you need to get to that level, just for a normie person to be able to understand that. And so I just realized that it's just totally fruitless to go down that path, because yes, someone can understand it, but they have to take the initiative on themselves to be able to, okay, I'm interested in this. I want to learn what's going on. And now I'm going to take the time to educate myself, rather than having it forced down their throat by someone who they deem as crazy. So yeah, I changed up my strategy.
Well, yeah. And I think that to kind of go on a little bit of where I resonated so much with listening to people like Owen, with my background, and me and Pat had I think a really great chat on his channel about, people don't really understand. I think people separate art from other things. And I think that when you understand a lot of the way that the world is actually structured, you have essentially your two forces, which is your masculine and your feminine. And with that, you basically, to put it in like the most simplistic terms, is you have thought and action. So you have an idea creation, and then the actual physical manifestation of that will, or whatever the dream essentially is. And essentially, if you run a business or something like that, I think people understand that more, because they have to dream up ways to add value to people's lives in ways that they can then, pay you with fiat currency. But you sort of have to imagine how you're going to create value for a return on that kind of that investment or something. So when people think about acting, or they think about any sort of artistic endeavor, they think it's over there and it's something different. And I think some of that comes from the fact that we're sort of trained to be employees that work for a paycheck and have a pension. Because with that, you don't really have any sort of room to innovate, I guess, unless it's just ways that you can hopefully clock out early and get your work done so that you get your paycheck and you don't really do all that much. But I guess the point that I'm driving at here is the fact that when you can understand that there's not really a separation between creativity and actual real world action, then understanding things like plays and movies and narrative is extremely important, especially in, again, like the ways that Benjamin and other people are able to break down the spells that are happening right in front of your eyes in the news and in the media. Because what you said about attention span, I think is huge with people on TikTok and all that stuff. And they're saying all this, transgender stuff that they're pushing on all these things and then whatever channel it is, right? But again, those are 1 minute videos. But for me, what I found really fascinating when I started, because I didn't like Shakespeare. I didn't like to anything to do with that when I was growing up. And I was more interested in movies. And when I was trained sort of classically theater in a theater sense. And I didn't even really like that anyways, because I just wanted to be in movies and whatnot. But what it taught me was, again, one, to memorize an entire play, which is a skill set in general, but also to break down Shakespeare is incredibly hard. And there's so much in that it demands you to A, have the attention span, and B, understand huge amounts of information and getting your brain to work differently. And I think that people are intimidated by that. And I just don't see a separation sometimes between understanding those core concepts and then the difficult things that we're seeing in the world right now, because I think there's a deliberate dumbing down of anything. And especially with Shakespeare, you can't even, it's really, really even hard to read that because our language is just absolutely destroyed because of that too. Right. And it just, yeah, I guess there's ways that you can take this into your life and integrate it just in general. And when you can understand that it is important to have a longer attention span to comprehend these sort of things, because if you don't, then you won't see the connections. You won't see the fact that half of the things that are happening right now are decades in the making, when people just think, oh, well, it was a singular event 2 years ago and now we're in the position that we're in.
Yeah, right. And I mean, you can sort of draw parallels from understanding Shakespeare and trying to act out that play to what you just said, is like looking at events as a singular occurrence rather than understanding the full context. So like if you're doing a Shakespeare play, you probably need to know a little bit about what was going on at the time in terms of the culture, in terms of how people live their lives, the difference between like I think he used humor that the common man would laugh at, but also they were also directed to the sort of royal society or whatever it is. And so as someone putting on that play, you probably have to understand the full context of the picture to be able to do your job better.
Yeah, not only that, he created almost all of tons and tons of vernacular that we use right now. He invented, right? And I always find it fun. I'm not a big hip hop or rap kind of guy, but I always find it funny if those guys are interested in those kind of things, right? And the whole thing is rhythm and poetry and all that stuff. There's no one better than that. And half the terminology that we have, he invented, out of thin air and tons of other ones I can't think off the top of my head. But yeah, when you're approaching that, it's like kind of like you said, you have to go, I don't understand anything about this, so I need to meet it halfway. And half the thing about acting sometimes is, and really great drama, and people can pick this out in any movie that they're in, there's a lot of times when there's words on the page, and as an actor and as a director or anything, when you're approaching those, you have to go, what's being said with these words? Because people can think that what they're hearing, the words that they're hearing, are the intention, but the intention behind the words is incredibly important. I think there is so much parallel between what we're seeing in the world and that I think people, I was saying in the chat with Pat, is people place artistic people or musicians and poets and actors and anything like that, they place them in this other place in society. When I guess the value that I saw, because I thought it was a huge waste of time once I started walking away from this, with paying attention to Owen Benjamin, being like, I can't give up my soul to even go after my dream and what I wanted to do for my whole life. It was hard to admit that it could have been a waste of time, but now I'm seeing how it's insane that a lot of people that I know are university educated people, very, very on paper intelligent people, and they're, now they're freaking out about monkeypox. And it's just sort of like, how did the guy who went to school for acting and film and theater and stuff like that see through this lie? And I think it's because of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So would you say there are parallels between, uh, let's say acting, storytelling, and how they portray these events and how they use, storytelling and narrative to, let's say, pull one over on society?
Well, what I find fascinating too about understanding intention is now looking at the law and understanding that the words that are being said are constructed in a certain way that everything here is an offer.
Hmm.
And looking at people like Tom Barnett and a lot of people who do talk about this and saying that you're being shown that there's only one way to go about this, or this is what's happening, but all of it is an offer.
Hmm.
And yeah, when you really break down what some of these people are saying, or if you read the actual, laws or whatever you want to call them that they're implementing, you can see how they're building in the sort of escape door for people like us who are like, yeah, I don't want to do this. And it's all written in there. And if you really break down the way that they're saying certain things, they're telling you that, we're trying to do this and we can only do it unless you guys let us, and everyone's letting them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so fascinating how, I don't know, we just went through a big health scare, and now we're about to go through another one, or maybe go through another one. But it's also the case that the narrative might not stick, it might not catch. And there could be sufficient enough pullback or pushback, or uh I would say unveiling of the nonsense, and then they just sort of pull back on what they were planning on doing. It's like it's almost like how what they describe as a virus would spread. Like if the narrative spreads, that's the virus. That's the virus in the way that they describe it. I'm not saying that the virus exists. I don't believe that they've ever proven a virus to exist. And so, but in the way that they describe it, the narrative is the virus, the story is the virus, in terms of if it spreads, if the narrative catches on and enough people believe it, then they will sort of bring that world into reality, at least in their own lives.
Yeah, and kind of like the way I was saying about the masculine and feminine, right? Like the thought and the action, and
Hmm.
you can see how like egregores, right, or gregors, or whatever you want to say it, right? That's just a thought form that actually takes on some sort of real world, I guess, implications, right? And all of it is just an idea form, and that's what we're seeing. Like you're saying, the virus is really like the thought form that they're trying to implement into people. And ironically, going back to the fact that people can't really draw parallels with this, is that we're seeing scientism as a religion right now, and
Hmm.
the people who are holding on to it are using every single way that people say religious people are ridiculous for believing in something. Anytime you poke a hole in it, they just go back to, oh, we just got to believe in God or something like
Right.
that. That's the exact idea that you have when you poke a hole in some of the science and they go, oh, you got to trust the science, or you don't believe
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z. It's the exact same mechanism that they're being brainwashed, and it's the exact same kind of regurgitation of that confrontation of their cognitive dissonance. And it's wild that people don't see that.
Yeah. Yeah. It is incredible. I mean, it would take a level of self-reflection and insight into the way that their own mind works, and also a divorcing from being on a team. So right now, I think Trump was a big part of this. He got or not necessarily him, but the way he was covered solidified teams. Like, I'm on team left, I'm on team right, I'm on anti-Trump team, I'm on this, whatever this other team is. And people have resorted to sticking with their team, what their team believes, as opposed to taking a step back, examining, you know, multiple different perspectives, and coming to a conclusion that may or may not agree with what their team has is saying. And so, I mean, in a way, he was like the perfect. I don't know if foil is the right word, but the perfect personality to get people, so vehemently into their own teams that I think he was used brilliantly by the powers that be to do that, to and now they can say, oh, well, trust the science, or, well, Trump did this, so I'm against it. And whatever it is, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they used to be anti-war and now they're pro-war. It doesn't matter at all. As long as their team is doing that, then that's what they're going to stick with.
Yeah, Trump is what woke me up, because around that time was around the time that I graduated, and I found Owen Benjamin getting kicked out of Hollywood with all this stuff. And obviously, being at a sort of art school, it is extremely liberal,
Yeah.
extremely liberal. And I didn't really care either way, but I knew people would say feminist stuff, and I'd be like, okay, I guess there's a point in that. I don't really understand. And then I would sort of poke holes in it and stuff about like, well, what about the masculine and feminine terms of like words in other languages? Are we just gonna like destroy that? Like the fact that a table is this and the sun is that, and they just didn't really have an answer or whatever. So I was like, this is just not really making sense. And then from an acting perspective, people were freaking out about Trump,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, how can you potentially play someone who has some sort of something devious in today's world or whatever, right? Or the Joker or Hitler or something like that. Every time someone says something like this, well, I have to find the truth in that person, why they think they're correct, and then relate to that and play that so that I can basically wear that hat for the time being, so that the story of the film or whatever is going to be relayed to the audience. But then people couldn't understand sympathizing with someone who's like Trump. And I was like, I don't get how you guys can say, well, I can play Hitler and find, the commonalities there, but Trump, I just can't.
Orange Hitler.
Yeah, yeah, orange. Yeah, yeah. But it was just sort of like I saw. It was like I saw then that you don't actually know this, or you don't actually think this. You're being told to think this, and you can't have that. You don't know how to, I guess, separate that. And then that led me down the path of like, oh my god. So what? One of the things that the first things that I did when I found Owen Benjamin was I started asking myself, okay, am I thinking my own thoughts? Like, are my thoughts mine, or are they dictated to me from something else? And then I realized the fact that like, no, they're not. They are dictated to me. And then it was like, holy hell. So how do I build the tools to have my own thoughts and to come draw my own conclusions? Because all I was doing was just either if this person said something that I admired, then that was my thought process. And people don't realize that that's the exact same thing that's happening right now with the people who are in charge of this science kind of paradigm.
Yeah. Do you think that people started off with, they totally on their own, they said, oh, Trump, wow, he's a really bad guy? Or do you think that, I totally disagree with his policy on fill in the blank? Or do you think people were, seeing how other people were reacting, or how the media was shaping people's thoughts and sort of going along with that team? And in today's culture, it's like, if you're not the most outraged, you don't get the attention. The most outraged person gets the attention. And so it's almost like a race to see who can be more outraged than the next person. And then you get the attention, and then and then it sort of builds from there. This almost hysteria builds, because it's, the story is shaped, how he's being portrayed is shaped, and then in order to get any attention, in order to be a loyal member of Team X, you have to be the most loud and vehemently opposed to whatever you're supposed to be opposed to.
Yeah, well, you're seeing it eat itself with people like Bill Maher even going, this is getting kind of crazy. You're having
Yeah.
people that were classically, but again, that's the kind of the Overton window, right? Is that if you're constantly in one place, but then one side just keeps moving so far over to the other side, you end up being a part of the team that you hated, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I think it depends on the output that the person is, the sort of like, if their output is to take to social media and do those things, I think that it's not a genuine thought process, because they're like, I have to fight this out of this sort of like conviction that I have, and I don't think that's genuine. I think if people are quietly like, I don't like Trump, I don't agree with his policy, if they're just doing that in their own home and they have their life and they're just kind of going about it and whatnot, I think that's more genuine. But the people, if you see it on social media, I think it's very easy to go, you have like had your brain opened, you had the sort of narrative just plopped in there, and then wired back on, and then you're now on team this, because you see that recently with the abortion thing, right? That hit Canada. Like, I had so many people that I knew. I don't watch the news anymore, but I can almost tell if something's happening by like Instagram stories when I check them, because out
Mhm,
of nowhere, so many girls that I knew just started sharing it, and I was like, okay,
mhm.
what the hell has happened overnight? Because this wasn't an issue yesterday, now it's an issue today,
Yeah.
and that was now we're just today it might be a week or two afterward, and no thought, no
Yeah.
comments on it at all, and you're kind of like, okay, so you guys cared for 2 weeks or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was they timed that to, in time for the midterm elections.
Yeah,
They got to do something to get out the votes. I think Biden is historically unpopular, as is his sidekick there. What's her name? Harris
Kamala.
something. Yep.
Yeah.
And so they got to do something to get out the vote. So um, yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, I got some thoughts on that, but I won't share them on this one, in case you want to share this later. So, um, but yeah, it's incredible how like a thought or an idea can be plopped into people's heads, like you were saying, and then it has its time span, and then it goes away as if maybe nothing happened. And I'm sure they're going to trot this out at a convenient time for them, the abortion thing, and then it'll go away when people stop talking about it or it's inconvenient for the powers that be. Um, in terms of like how they roll it out, is there a technique or a skill that they're using, like speaking from sort of the acting and the theater show business type of thing? Are there specific techniques that they use to to get these ideas across?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that um looking at what I'm trying to move into now with marketing and stuff like that, it's interesting. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition where you're trying not to, for me, knowing what I know with paying attention to people who are interested in building a better future, you're trying not to be deceptive in any sort of way, but at the same time, you have to make it desirable for someone to
Mhm.
to either want to pay attention to their health or anything like that. And I think that it's kind of, to a certain degree, you're almost acting like with kids with the airplane and the broccoli or something like that, right? You're just sort of like, listen, this is like, if I'm using this for good, then maybe the tactics that I'm using could be, in certain people's minds questionable, but at the end of the day, we're trying for goodness here, and we're trying to get that into you, kind of thing. But with that, with most of marketing, to a certain degree, you basically have a huge portion of that is to establish authority, have the value perception, have this sort of new opportunity or something like that, aggravate a pain point, show what's in it for them, have a common enemy, and then make a call to action or the urgency of what you need to do.
Yeah.
So I think you can almost point to every single one of those during what they're trying to roll out and go, okay, so that's the new opportunity or this new thing for what they're trying to roll out.
Mhm.
They're using these people as a an authority figure. Here's the common entity that they're going after.
Yeah.
Here's the or the social proof or something like that. And then here's the ostracization or something like that if you don't conform to this idea. And then here's your call to action. Here's exactly what you do: is roll up your sleeve or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like a template that they've used and perfected, and then they just change up, the variables. Is it the variables, or they change up the details to fit whatever narrative or script that they need to trot out at a given time? And so, if it's abortion, we need people at the polls, so let's get them all excited and riled up. So we need people to get out and vote because we're doing a terrible job and everyone hates us, so now we need to get people excited. If it's we need to inject people with enough technology so that we can track them and get them hooked up to the cloud, then we need a narrative to justify why we need to put something in their arm. So let's roll out a different thing. And so yeah, it almost follows a script, like a narrative or a story, because we learn in stories. That's why children are so drawn to stories and books and narrative. It's because that's how we learn. That's how we uh teach more complex concepts. We don't say stop making up stories when you're in trouble. We tell them the boy who cried wolf, and so they learn a concept through a story or a narrative. And so it's like the powers that be have realized that, perfected the art form, and then just change up the details to fit whatever they need.
Yeah, and you have this with the MK Ultra and all those sort of brainwashing things, and you have Edward Bernays, right? He
Yeah.
effectively found that out, and it's the interesting. This is what I'm again like what I'm trying to move into is use almost like use what they're doing, but use it for good. And you guys have made the blueprint, so now it's almost like showing people this sort of bear community or something like that. And Crow has I think Fortune Saint Germain. He keeps talking about the New Jerusalem or
Mhm.
with Owen's Beartaria. It's like if you
Yeah.
can make that so appealing to people, but use almost the ways that they're trying to influence you over here to go towards the light. I think that's kind of where we're heading. And yeah, you have the exact same thing with with what's happening in the world right now. They're trying to make it it's almost like they're trying to make it like cool and like sexy to be part of this
Yeah.
this digital system where, hey man, like everything you ever wanted to do is on the cloud, and like you don't even have to take your phone out now. It's all just, you can do it all, you can just think your thoughts, and that's how it's gonna. And it's just, anyone who knows what we know is like, that sounds insane, but they're trying very hard to make this some sort of marketable thing, and they're using these new platforms like TikTok and all these different things
Mhm.
to try to ramp that up. And I think if you understand what marketing is, how you're being, how to influence people, then you can understand how you're influenced and then move hopefully in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about like what we think the because I often describe it as two worlds for me. You have one world that is all excited about hooking themselves up to the cloud, and it's just going to be super convenient to just think you want to order chicken wings and then it shows up at your door. Whereas that might not be the most human existence. And I like going in my garden and going barefoot on the ground, and having my own thoughts, and raising my children and all that stuff. Where do you see that going? Like, are you in the similar camp where you see sort of two worlds forming, or what are your thoughts?
Um, it's tough, man. I think that without a lot of people being in sort of similar places, I feel there's a value in even how we're connecting here over technology. But
Mhm.
yeah, to have people who are in the mindsets that we're in, but spaced out so drastically, I think does have its pitfalls. And
Yeah.
one of the things I listen to, Dean Clifford's a really great guy talking about, how to protect yourself in certain ways with the law and whatnot. Um, but he says, if we can't agree on something as fundamental as we should probably, puts it, I'll put it in a better way, so this is going to reach more people, but in ways that maybe we shouldn't do certain things to children. If we can't agree on that, then it's really hard to build something with people that are even entertaining that idea or are not actively trying to oppose that idea. I think that there are two parallel systems kind of forming, and I think that they're definitely going to manifest in the next couple of years.
Mhm.
I think it's going to be a lot more difficult than people think. I think that they're trying whole hog for this, right? Like they're really going for it, and it's a difficult sort of game that we have to play where it's not playing into their system, but also if it does get to a certain point, to be able to genuinely fight back in the correct ways as opposed to just again playing into that kind of system. But it's hard, man. Like I think a lot of people have the idea of homesteading and all that kind of stuff, and I'll just be in nature, and nature's great. And it's like, well, nature's also brutal, man. Like
Mhm.
I don't know, especially in Canada, man. It sucks, dude. Six
Yeah.
months of the year, we are pretty well done, like just done for.
Yeah.
It's really hard to like even be outside for an extended period of time. And that was one thing I'm contending with where we're going is like, man, if I'm doing this in Canada, like this is going to be really difficult.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I could definitely see that. I mean, I moved out of the cold. What was it, almost 6 years ago? I lived in the Northeast US, and yeah, that is a tough winter. Probably not as tough as Canada, but still pretty brutal. And And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of challenges, on this side. It's like, yeah, it seems nice, like you said, homesteading, that dream, you sort of picture it in your head, and you have your chickens and your goats and all that stuff, and it's, that picture you could draw looks nice, but there's a lot of work there, a lot of knowledge to be gained, or that you need to gain in order to get to that level. I'm probably 10% there. I don't even know if I'm that far, um, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff to, even people who don't necessarily think that they're, or trying to get off dependence or off grid, or off depending on the system or something like that, it's still a daunting challenge to really do that, because so much of our lives and existence are tied to the existing system and structures that have been put in place. And it's a daunting challenge to break free from that.
Especially when you're trying to build communities with people who are able to provide value in different ways.
Mhm.
And not everyone can grow food and stuff like that. Everyone can homestead to a certain degree, but not everyone can homestead full time, right? Like some of the
Mhm.
people who are homesteading need tools and equipment or X, Y, and Z, and other people need to provide those. Hopefully, people who are in the same mindset that we are. But then if that person's providing that, that person can't stay at home and homestead for the entire day, right? So that even it's difficult, man. And I think that we have to it's about trying to be very intelligent and deliberate as to how we build these systems, because I think homesteading is huge. I think being able to be agrarian to certain degree is the way forward. But at the same time, not everyone can do that full time, because they need to provide other things for the same people that are in the same mindset as us, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it sort of underscores the notion of caution about, wanting the system to collapse. Like we still depend very heavily on it, and there's the freedom movement. Some people in the freedom movement or the crypto space or something like that, they let's end the Fed and go to gold backed currency and all that stuff. And let's be careful about this, because it's a lot of things happen, and things move in the economy that are tied to the system. So let's be careful of that, and not to say that we shouldn't be working to extricate ourselves and be as uh least dependent on it as possible, but still use it as appropriately.
Yeah, and Dean, again, the guy that I listen to a lot, Dean Clifford, he talks a lot about, and that's what the law fascinates me, is because if we can truly understand that and understand it's all commerce and it's all contracts and whatnot, if we start contracting for our time and we're able to essentially very insulate ourselves in their own system and say, okay, here, if you want to contract anymore, here's what my fee is, and I don't like to contract with you guys, so it's exorbitant. And other than that, leave me alone. Because the other side of what you said, I think is huge too, is people just want to get rid of the entire system. And it's like, guys, we built the system. At the end of the day, like maybe they financed it and they tricked us into doing, getting into these certain ways. But the people who are building the roads are us. The roads are ours. The
Mhm.
ways of which we are in the society that we're in were built by us, maybe under false pretenses. But it's not about ripping those up and starting fresh. It's more about just taking them back over and saying, no, we're going to use this for good now. We're not going to use it for
Mhm.
the path that you want to take us on.
Yeah, and I think what may happen on the economic front um might sort of rebalance that. We have, and tying it back to sort of your background, or where you were headed in your life and career, in terms of like the acting and maybe Hollywood and all that stuff. Like, you have what looks like a deliberate destruction of that entire industry, where they're remaking movies with a quote unquote woke agenda, and they're basically destroying them and making them unwatchable. And that's all well and good when the share price keeps going up, when Netflix's share price continues to rise despite making the woke content that they're putting out. That's all well and good, but once it starts to crash, well, then now the investors are saying, hey, wait a second, we need to we can't, just get woke, go broke until we're actually broke. We have to do something about this, and maybe put things out that people actually want to watch. And I listened to a video, um, State Farm Insurance. There was a leaked emails about how they're supporting trans kids. I don't know exactly what it is, but they were encouraging employees to donate trans friendly books to libraries, and to support trans friendly education for children 5 and up. And it's like, that, what does State Farm Insurance have anything to do with that? Like, why would they care? It seems like that would go directly against their business model, and what they're there to do, what service they're there to provide to society. And so I think that people can get away with, or companies can get away with it when the share price is going up. But if we're seeing what I think is going to happen, which a sort of come back to reality on the economy and stock market and those types of things, then maybe things might change, and maybe things will get sort of retaken over. And and then we have more of a meritocracy, and more of a return to like a company actually producing a product, selling it at a fair price, and people buying it because they want that product at a fair price. And maybe that's just the way forward.
Yeah, well, that was another thing that woke me up too, where I was looking at movies and going, how are they destroying an entire franchise that they could just pump this out over and
Yeah,
over and over again and make so much return on their investment? And Vince
yeah,
Vaughn's a good guy too, right? Like I think he was a 10-1 draw, where if they paid him $1, they knew that they would get 10 back. And you go, why would they let this guy leave Hollywood?
yeah,
And he's just one of the guys, again, like Owen talks about too, is he's more of a conservative guy. And they just were kind of like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. And you just kind of
yeah.
go, why would a business be in business to lose money on this sort of
Mhm,
in this regard? But I think it's because they're after something else that's more important
mhm.
than money, or more valuable than money. I think they kind of mess with people's brains. They're like, how does that ever work? But there's another guy I worked with over the summer, and Jacob Telling. He's talking about something called the Biderman report, and that's effectively, if I'm going to butcher this, forgive me, but it's essentially saying if things, it's the purpose of it is to not make sense. So
Mhm.
it's meant to kind of scramble your brain, right? It's like the experiment is to scrambles people's brains so much that they break, and that's what we're seeing with all the stupidity of. But if it's small enough to go through the mask, what's the mask for, and all that kind of stuff, it's supposed to
Right.
break your brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there are, I've heard too, and I'm sure you have as well. I have heard that there's a lot of people with a lot of money are also seeing, like, they're kind of pissed off too, because they're seeing how this is kind of being taken out from underneath them in
Mhm.
a certain way. They're going, like, I worked, and that's the one thing I don't agree with a lot of the sort of truther side to a certain degree, is this anti-capitalist stuff. And I understand there's flaws in some of these sort of things, but like, if someone is very, very valuable to the society by providing a value, then they do have the right to be compensated for that. I think people who genuinely have that, they're like, hey, wait a minute, guys, like, if you're printing all this stuff I worked very hard for is becoming meaningless, and I'm not down for that. And I've heard, like, a lot of famous, a lot of rich people, a lot of people in the know, they're not down for what's going on, and they're definitely haven't got the injections and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you're a major shareholder in one of these companies, and like, getting back to the Federal Reserve, like interest rates and money printing and all that stuff, and the stock market is sort of an inflation hedge more than a reflection of the fundamentals of the economy. And so, all right, so everyone's making money in the stock market, but then when reality sets in, and interest rates rise, stock market is starting to collapse. I think we're already in a bear market. I'm not sure exactly, but I think we're at least down, like, close to 20% from the highs. People start to get, like, hey, wait a second, what's going on? I thought I was making money. We're doing these things that are not making money. Like you said, but totally destroyed franchise move, like the franchises, Star Wars, and I think Star Trek is going woke, and the Ghostbusters movie and all that stuff, like the whole thing, now people are starting to not make so much money and now lose money, and they're like, wait a second, what's going on? And so, like, I don't see any issue with someone providing value to the world and then getting compensated for it. I don't see any issue with that at all. I'm actually, sort of seeing the Vox Day argument of like this, totally unfettered free market capitalism can lead to the destruction of the family unit, because if you're just allowed to move and move your production plants anywhere, then that'll lead to companies looking for the lowest cost wherever they can get it, leads to breaking up and destruction of the family unit. So I can see an argument to sort of contain it within geographic regions. But as far as compensating people for the value that they provide, I think that absolutely, if you're providing value, you should definitely be compensated for it.
Yeah, one of the things you're talking about, the Vox Day stuff there, one of the things I was thinking recently, and it's a almost a schism that I have in my brain, knowing what I know about the law and then governments or corporations and stuff, is that you have the destruction of people having any sort of national pride.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the idea of, well, okay, well, yeah, but why? What would be the purpose of keeping the plant here? What's so great about America, or what's so great about Canada? Like, yeah, move it somewhere else and like help their economy. And it's kind of like, because you live here, man. That's
Yeah.
why. Because if you do well, then everyone around you does well, and that makes the sort of share price go up. And your dad had a great talk with Catherine Austin Fitts, and her idea of the sort of the true decentralized kind of stuff of that, your direct township does well, and it's almost the pension funds and a lot of the hedge funds and stuff like that are in that are directly proportionate to the actual town doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I think that's more or less what it is. But it's interesting that they went after destroying the sort of pride of being where you're from. But at the same time, I also don't, when I see flags now, I also think like, okay, is that the corporation's sort of sigil, or is that the actual, this, I guess, the actual pride of being a part of the people that you're around and the sort of nation that you're from?
Yeah, I have a similar schism in my brain too, because it's like, okay, so the US is like this crazy, war machine, empire, out there, regime change, all that stuff. And at the same time, like, my neighbors are, we're all under the same flag, and I like my neighbors, and we trade together, we do things together. I have a neighbor, they grow a bunch of chickens, and I'm like, what can I do to help you expand your operation? Because I go there and I get my eggs and I get my meat, my chickens from them. And probably like 3 weeks in a row, like they have 100 laying hens, and they have, tons of eggs, like 3 weeks in a row. Every time I went there, they were sold out of eggs. So I'm like, this is like, what's going on? Like, and so I said, what can I do to help you expand your operation so that so I have access to eggs, but then it also helps them because they have more eggs to sell and more chicken to sell. And so, that's an example of how you can sort of strengthen your local area, your community, your neighbors, and then it benefit, and it has like this sort of outward rippling effect to benefit everyone else, because then all the other neighbors get to have more eggs and more chicken and all that stuff, and then she makes more money because she's selling more eggs. And so if I can play a small part in helping that's sort of building the community from the ground up, rather than some sort of outside investor comes in with, we're gonna put in these chicken houses, and then Tyson Chicken's gonna come in and buy them at a few cents a pound, and then sell them to Kroger.
It's tough, man. And I don't even know where if I should even go this route,
Right.
but I think that's sort of one of the huge issues about something that happened in 1940 was, a country was kind of going on the realm of let's do our own thing, and let's kind of have the pride of being our own kind of really, top notch country and stuff. And you know, I think that for the objective of what's happening in today's day and age and what we've been seeing over the past few years, that idea that you just kind of laid out there can't happen, because
Mhm.
then it's truly decentralized. Because it's almost, because if you build the systems of which you're not dependent on any sort of overarching figure, then the overarching figure doesn't have any power.
Mhm.
And the overarching power only has power if everyone's dependent on them. And it's crazy, man. And I think that, I don't know, I think that certain parts of America get it, and certain parts of Canadians get it, but I think that there's something built into, I guess, the American dream, or the American kind of pride, that is, my rights come from my creator. And I have a hard time sometimes dealing with that, about kind of what we were talking about earlier about how do we get to where we want to go and what's it going to take. And I think that a lot of times I don't find, I'm trying to be very hopeful, and I definitely think that there is hope. It's just when I do look around me and some of the people, especially as Canadians, as being these kind of nice, polite people, a lot of them don't see it, man. They don't see that it's sort of like, these guys are working for us, and if they're not benefiting us, what's the purpose of that? And I think that, a lot of them are pushovers, and they don't have that kind of, what you're just talking about there, of like, how can I help my neighbor? It's sort of like, well, doesn't the government help my neighbor? So why do I need to?
Interesting. Do you think that there's something sort of unique about the American mindset that isn't present? And is there any way to sort of put your finger on it or quantify that that's different in America than Canada?
Well, one of the things I love about having this podcast too is I'm able to talk to people like you and other people that I've connected with that I just wouldn't have before. And I had
Mhm.
a 3-hour conversation with someone that I'm hoping to get on the podcast soon about Canadian law. And one of the biggest things about that was the difference between the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the
Mhm.
Bill of Rights. And because you guys have the Declaration of Independence and your Constitution and whatnot, and it's
Mhm.
not the same in Canada. And what Pierre Trudeau, Justin's dad, did was introduce the charter.
Dad.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's a whole other rabbit hole. But he effectively made the charter, and one of the first points in that, if I'm getting the wording wrong, it's something like this: of these these rights herein are guaranteed by the government, unless under some sort of circumstances, something like dire circumstances, or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but I saw it like during the trucker rally. I saw one of the authors of the Canada Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or whatever it is. He was saying, unless there's some sort of dire restraint, and I end up thinking, like, that is very vague language. The government could essentially use that and say, oh, well, this is a dire strait. Obviously there's a pandemic going on. What are you, nuts? Of course we're going to shut you down and take your money and freeze your bank account. Like, of course.
right. And
So,
that's where I think it was built in, is because they built that. The court systems basically are like, oh yeah, this is amazing. Like, this can generate so much revenue for us, because we can just say this is dire circumstances, or whatever the terminology is. But what I'm finding out from these individuals who are working on this, they're called Stand for Thee, and they're really talking about the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights was introduced in the 60s to kind of prevent this, which is understanding and recognizing the basic human rights under the supremacy of God that are essentially similar to your Constitution. But
mhm.
this is a whole other document that's never talked about. So it's almost like the perpetration of the charter, putting it into the law system, teaching in the law system. And same thing with, I was talking about the allopathic flywheel. It's almost like the law flywheel of, if you just implement this, teach this, put it in the court system, then it's just, well, this is the way it goes. And we don't have the same system as America and all that kind of stuff. But there are documents and stuff like that, to like the Bill of Rights, that actually does that. And a lot of times that doesn't make it to court, because when people put that into their sort of trial document, or whatever you want to call it, it gets thrown away, because they go, damn, we can't get this, settle out of court, no harm, no foul. And I think that kind of plays into what you were asking, was I think that because you guys have the Constitution, and I mean, I'm sure there's Americans that are like Canadians that where they don't think this way, but I think that it is sort of built and taught in certain circumstances that that's the way it is. And I think that the way that they've kind of implemented it since the 80s, when this was kind of implemented with Pierre, that's kind of what people think about the government. And then again, then our rights come from the government. They don't come from anything like that. We don't have them innately. They're granted to us by these people. And now we get people who are just unbelievably passive in society.
Yeah. And so that like has the way it was set up, kind of, it seems like it translates into the mindset and mentality of the people. Like, there could be something like just unique about American culture and mindset. Like, no, you're not going to do this to me. You have no right to do this. I can do this. I'm an American, and go screw off. And maybe that just doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. I mean, I've probably been to maybe 10 different countries, something like that. So not a whole lot, but enough to see all the other cultures. And, when I go to certain other places, I don't only stay in the resort areas. I go out and see, how people are actually living. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to quantify or put your finger on exactly what it is, but maybe it's just that sort of unique mentality that we have.
And I think a lot of people gravitate to that. So a lot of the immigrants, especially in Canada too, and I've talked to a lot of people who are Eastern European, and none of them are down for this. They are
Yeah.
so unbelievably pissed off because they're like, this is what we fucking left.
Yeah.
And, and I think that you get that in America because people gravitate to America for that idea as well.
Mhm.
But what I was trying to say about the flywheel too, I think that that's important with going back to the training that I have with acting and storytelling and with basically creating narratives.
Mhm.
When you're creating a script or something like that, you're creating, like, you have to create the entire world, and you have to make sure that even if almost the wrong word is like physics, but even if the physics of that weird world operate differently than the current world that we're seeing with some sort of fantasy thing or whatever, they have to be logically consistent to a certain degree too. So
Mhm.
when you're crafting a world, you have to make sure that all the pieces line up. But the interesting thing about that is that when you get to the end, you can then re-edit it and go to the beginning. So you can basically craft this entire narrative that works as a flywheel that's perfect in its own system. And that's what I think is the correlation to the real world with things like the allopathic system, what I just talked about with the law and teaching people how to obey the government. Is if you build that system and you basically just nail every point of that, then you have a self-contained narrative and a self-contained story that people play out in the real world without even knowing it because they're not aware of the way that the narrative was constructed.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like people's perspective can't even conceptualize and sort of look down on the world that was created for them. And that's almost, I sort of use that analogy when we were going through the whole corona nonsense, where it was like I'd been expecting for about, I don't know, 8 to 10 years, travel restrictions and injection passports and the rest of it. And it was like, okay, now it's game time. And now I have this sort of 30,000 foot vantage point of these events that are being played out. And it's like, holy cow, this is it. This is how they're going about it. And so it's very rare to have that perspective of, the events that are playing out in front of us, because so many of us, we're busy. People are busy. They don't have the time or the really the context, like I was talking about in the beginning. If you're talking to someone who's never heard of that the Federal Reserve is private, like how do you explain that entire context before they totally lose interest, or just don't have that attention span to follow along? And it's like, that's, I think, what we're dealing with. We have so much um uh you know so much going on in our lives that we don't have the ability to sort of zoom out and take the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I heard you talk about recently with, I think it was on Pat's show, about the lie of a lot of feminist arguments and getting the women out of the household and stuff too. And what that was essentially is breaking the system, breaking the unit even more.
Mhm.
And again, it's making you more and more dependent on the system. And then you don't I don't doubt I don't fault people for saying they don't have the time, but at the same time, you kind of have to say, well, they're going for everything, so find the time or else we're
Yeah.
kind of out of it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But again, like they built this system years ago to the point where they know that people don't have the time for this because both parents
Mhm.
have to work and their kids are being indoctrinated at school while they're away, and they got to pay taxes, and half of their, three-quarters of their income this week is going to the house that they can't afford, and it's overpriced now. You know what I mean? It's just it's
Mhm.
built into the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So if you don't take the time to invest in your health right now, you're going to spend the time investing in sick care when you get sick. So if you don't take the time to invest in learning about what's going on and figuring out ways that you can extricate yourself from the system, like just not having a corporate job would have saved a lot of people from getting the injection, just not needing to do certain things in your life as your job, like would have saved a lot of injections. And so that's one of the things that I am super grateful for is, I made certain decisions in my life because I saw some things coming. um and
Yeah, and I
so
think, and what can come to it, just that reminded me of a conversation I had recently about homeschooling, and it was, well, what do you teach then, and how do you kind of do these things? And it's sort of like, well, if it's, for one, if it's a PMA, then it's a private membership association, and then you can literally pay directly the teacher, and then the members of that association can then dictate the curriculum.
Mhm.
But you can have a lot more fun with this stuff, and then because people are dependent on corporate systems, it's because our corporate jobs is because that's what we're taught. We go to high school and you try to get really good grades, and you go to university and try to go to university and get certain degrees because then you're really employable. But what if you taught kids from an early age, like, here's your assignment. Find out 10 different ways you can not have a boss and be totally free in life.
Yeah.
And then it gets them thinking, oh, maybe I can do this, or how to find ways to make money online without a boss or something like that. And that
Yeah.
empowers the individual and gets them to think from a young age about how they can create value and do all these things. But that's not it's not beneficial to the current system, but it's beneficial to hopefully the one that we're going to build.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good place to call it call it a day. Sorry, I can't talk right now. But yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed having you on. Again, Rob Edward, he has his own podcast, a lot of really great, interesting guests on there. Check him out on YouTube. Where else can they find you?
YouTube, Odyssey, all that stuff. It's either my name, Rob Edward, or Dig Within.
Dig Within. All right, awesome. That's the name of your podcast?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. And so, yeah, I mean, and we talked a lot about storytelling and narrative building. And so if you do have, some sort of product or service, this is how you sort of convey the value proposition of what you're selling. And so it involves storytelling and, um, narrative. And so that's the way people think. And there's a way to do it for good. It doesn't have to be a sort of manipulative thing for pushing the trans agenda. It could be, in my case, I'm trying to get people to eat more vegetables. I think that's a good thing. And so reach out to Rob if you have any questions about that. Dig Within podcast. He's, like he said, YouTube, other platforms as well. So Rob, thanks again for joining me, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, man. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks. Cool, man. Thanks.